Welcome everybody to DOCTALKS. My name is Bill Spangler-Dunning. I serve as the regional minister in Virginia, and this is DOCTALKS, basically a conversation ministry of the Virginia region for the rest of the church as it seems appropriate. Today we have the exciting conversation with Dr. Lisa Barnett, who is a professor at Phillips Theological Seminary, but also is one of the moderators of the Center for Indigenous Ministries, which is the focus of our conversation today. Some of you may have heard of that, and others may not have ever heard of this ministry. And I just think it's important that we know about this critical ministry, talk about it, and even if you might have interest in getting more involved in this, ways that might happen too. So I just want to introduce to you Dr. Lisa Barnett. I love what she does. She's also extremely helpful to my son. Personal note there, since I'm the host. So thank you, Dr. Barnett. Would you just introduce yourself a little more and then tell us a little bit about Center for Indigenous Ministries, and we'll go from there.
Sure. And I just got an email. My co-moderator, Crow Eddy from Nova Scotia, got the dates mixed up and is not going to be able to join us today. So he apologizes. Okay. So you're left with me to talk about the Center for Indigenous Ministries. First of all, just a little bit about myself. I grew up in Oklahoma, but I traveled to Texas, where I received my Master of Divinity and a Master of Theological Studies from Bright Divinity School, focusing on American religious history for the THM. And then I went across the street to TCU for my PhD work in U.S. history, where I focus on a lot of Western history and Native American history, as well as American religious history, and put all of that together. So personally, I identify as Indigenous descent. And I say Indigenous descent because I am an enrolled member of Crow is coming in. I am an enrolled member of a non-federally recognized tribe, the Northern Cherokee of Missouri and Arkansas, that is recognized as sovereign nation by the state of Missouri. But generations ago, culturally lost a connection, and that's why I say Indigenous descent. And I am one of the co-moderators for the Center for Indigenous Ministry. We actually changed our name about 3 or 4 years ago, I think, because we had been operating under the Disciples Home Mission Ministry of Yakima Christian Mission. And we decided, as with Dave Bell sort of serving as our executive secretary for Yakima and for the center, but we decided we didn't want to be connected with a name that is so colonizing in terms of the mission work that was done to the Yakima people in the state of what is now the state of Washington. And so we wanted to expand our own ministry within the Disciples of Christ to include lots of issues of social justice on behalf of Indigenous peoples. And that can be North America, South America, Hawaiian Islands, Australia. I mean, we want to expand this concept of indigeneity and various oppressions that affect all peoples. And so that's a little bit where we are with the Center for Indigenous Ministries and some of the work that we are trying to do. And I'm going to stop there with my introduction and turn it over to my beloved elder and co-moderator, Crow Eddy, to introduce himself.
Oh, just unmute and you're good to go, Crow.
Now you can hear me. Hello, everyone. Sorry, I'm a little bit late. I was looking at the time change and thought that I'd completely missed the meeting. So, Bill, you've received an apology letter. And then I figured out that I hadn't missed the meeting, but I was believing the meeting was on Friday. So I'm here. I'm happy to be here. It's nice to see everybody. I just caught the last part of what Lisa was speaking about. And I think that really describes our mission with the Center for Indigenous Ministries. I'm just thinking, what could I add to that? We have different projects in mind. We've been constantly or for a few years been providing winter talk, which some of you may know of, a seminar that takes place or has been taking place in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And we're at this point looking at what else can we do as a ministry. And we're really thinking and working towards having a truth and healing project across what I would call Turtle Island. If you're not familiar with the term, that means North America, Canada, and the US. And with the truth and healing part of our ministry, what we're planning is having filmed talks with Indigenous people to hear their voice, to give them a chance to share their voice about the oppression, about residential school experiences. With residential schools, it's the first thing that comes to our mind. It's the biggest thing on the table, and yet there are so many other levels of oppression that take place even today that I'm sure a lot of the people interviewed would be more than willing and hopeful to speak about. And with that collected data, then we would have something the collected data not only helps the people who are speaking, but will also help the people who are watching it and listening to create a greater awareness of the problems facing the problems that the Native population is coming from and the problems that we're facing today.
Crow, can you tell us just a little bit, situate yourself for this group about who you are and where you're located?
Oh, sure. It is an introduction, isn't it?
Yeah.
I kind of skipped that part.
That's okay. You had great words, but we want to know who you are too.
I understand, Lisa. Yeah, I'm Crow Eddy. I'm a Mi'kmaq native. I'm coming to you from Nova Scotia, Canada. And I'm the only member of the ministry at this point from Canada. We're set up a bit different than the United States because Disciples here is a smaller congregation. So we have one regional minister for the entire country. So it'll give you some idea how much smaller we are. I run a Native Healing Circle here in Milton, Nova Scotia, and I'm a Native elder here. Yeah, I'm not good at
Awesome.
talking about myself. So
No, thank you, Crow. Crow, I'm going to follow up on the Truth and Healing Council that we announced. That is part of. We include some of that information in our resolution that will hopefully be coming before the General Assembly this coming summer. But this idea of really when Winter Talk started with Dave and I think Blue Eagle and a smaller group before it became the Center for Indigenous Ministry, the point was to trace this idea of how Christianity has also been harmful to Indigenous peoples and to a lot of other folks in different racial groupings, that Christianity over time had become a weapon to be used for oppression and subjugation. And yet Native peoples who encountered Christianity somehow adopted aspects of Christianity and made it their own and made it meaningful to them. But we still have to consider some of those papal encyclicals, papal bulls from that period of colonial exploration that contributed to this doctrine of discovery that then in American context got codified into law with some Supreme Court decisions and continued to lead to the taking of land, right? And that's where the Center for Indigenous Ministries is really sort of focused on in terms of justice for Indigenous peoples also should have a reparation component with it as well. Because all of our churches, if we think about it, this building that I am sitting in right now, Phillips Theological Seminary, is on stolen land. Your churches, your homes, everything was part of an indigenous continent that then Western Europeans came to Turtle Island, right? And took the land for themselves and brought others with them against their will, a lot of times, to settle in this place. And so part of an acknowledgement for the larger church is to just see how even our own expansion westward of Christian churches, disciples of Christ, participated in that manifest destiny and that settler colonialism that still impacts Native peoples today. So that's what the center is all about, trying to get information like that out there and to put Indigenous people in the conversation in terms of social justice issues, because oftentimes, particularly in the Christian church, disciples of Christ, because we don't have specific Native American congregations. Native Americans and people like me, Indigenous descent, are mixed in a lot of congregations, but we don't have our own Native American church, right? Native American Indigenous church. And so we often overlook that particular part of the Christian disciples population in terms of social justice issues. So I'll stop. Bill, I don't know if you want to open for conversation, questions, or some further thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. Because remember, this is a conversation. I just want to introduce this, and people do have conversations. I do eventually want to spend a little bit of time on, in brief, what's the resolution coming, hopefully coming before the General Assembly? What's the core of that resolution asking for?
Right. And I'm pulling it up, right. The title is Recognition of a Truth and Healing Council that Crow was talking about, to honor our covenantal relationship with Indigenous peoples and to discern ways of reparations for a path to reconciliation. So it is a resolution acknowledging this has happened, and particularly our denominational connection to a residential school, what once wanted to start out being a residential school with Yakima, but even our own complicitness with our ministry with the Yakima people and the taking of a lot of the land and the utilizing of a lot of their resources for our own personal gain, but promoting this idea of a truth and healing council to collect those stories, to have someone hear it and to present those findings to the general church, and then to make people aware, how can we start to talk about reparations, particularly at the denominational level? How can churches, how can institutions of education sitting on land, how can we make amends for the land that we are on? Not necessarily that we're saying to give the land back, although that would be wonderful, but we know probably that's not going to happen. But how can we take seriously then doing more than just a mere land acknowledgement to say, oh, here we sit on land that was once belonged to the Osage and then belonged to the Cherokee after they were displaced, right, in their own diaspora. So how can we move beyond that? Well, maybe our institution needs to take a look at offering a scholarship here specifically for a Native American student to come and study, right? So those are we're just kind of pushing different factions of the church and different ministries in the church to start thinking about how we can make things not right, but how we can reconcile some of the sin of the past to at least bring ourselves into a covenantal relationship. Crow, I'll let you add to that.
Well, yeah, I think that's the important part is building a relationship. We are how can I say, we're like an invisible people, even though we are the people of this land. I always like to explain to people, because I'm not sure, how educated people are on natives and our existence here, but we're with different nations. So I'm a Mi'kmaq. That's we like to say, well, what tribe are you from? And you're Mi'kmaq. Well, really, the Mi'kmaq are a nation. We were a nation with our own country, and the same with every other nation across North America. We had our own country. With a lot of cruelty and finagling, we lost our countries. In a lot of cases, it wasn't by war. A situation where one country takes over another. We've seen that happen throughout the centuries in Europe, but here it's a different situation. We were more like pushed to the back corners of our land. I like to describe it as you invite a relative to stay at your house. And we did invite people to be on our land, and you invite a relative to stay at your house, and they say, well, would you mind if my cousin comes and stays too? And you go, okay, your cousin can come. And then they're there and they say, well, I got these aunties and uncles, can they come too? And you're like, oh yeah, they could come. And then it gets to the point where they say, well, would you mind moving to live in the backyard so we could have some more room in the house? And that's basically the slow process that's been involved in taking the land from us. Here in Nova Scotia, there are a few other places in Canada I know of. The United States, I'm not aware of, because your systems are so different than ours in these terms. But Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, New Brunswick, parts of Maine were all Mi'kmaq at one time, and this is unceded territory. We never signed any treaty to say, okay, we'll hand this over to you, which is a situation where our other nations have sold their land or signed it over. Our land isn't even signed over. It's still as far as paper and the law is concerned, it's still our land, and yet we don't have any rights regarding that matter. So, our church, back to what do we do to acknowledge the fact that our churches are on this land, or our homes are on this land? Our church does a land acknowledgement. It's a start. It's a start, and some people in the Native community just kind of take it as tongue in cheek. What does that really mean? We're sorry, we're on your land, and let's get on with the service. It is a start, however, that it does make a point that people are waking up to the fact that there are an oppressed people behind everything that we now celebrate and hold dear in North America.
Do you have a question in the chat? Reading it. I understand the desire to have an Indigenous church and feel that that's important. What is the problem or problems Indigenous persons are having to start? Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Does that make sense as a question?
I'm not sure that our goal is not necessarily to have an indigenous church. We're saying that that's one of the reasons why, as Crow said, we're so invisible within the Christian church disciples of Christ, because we don't have an indigenous church, much like a lot of the African American churches or the Hispanic churches or the Korean churches within disciples, or the Tongo churches, so we don't have that. And so people forget that indigenous people are also members of the Christian church disciples of Christ. So it's not that we're necessarily advocating for the indigenous church, but we are advocating for a seat at the table in the denomination to discuss issues of indigeneity and how the church can do better being in covenantal relationship with indigenous people. If that makes sense. Is that kind of...
It does totally, and I don't think people necessarily understand that there's no one at the table to even talk about these issues. That's why the vitality, the importance of Center for Indigenous Ministries. That's why I like it at least has something with it.
Right.
But you're asking for a seat at the table, even funding that seat at the table,
right?
Just like all of our others, and that makes sense. In order to do that, anybody else have any other questions? I have about 12, so I want to make sure we're giving people to ask a questions, or even part of the reason why I do this, and for people who also might be listening to this later, is I just want people to know about this ministry, to bring a little more light to it. And also, how does someone get involved with this? Because a lot of times people don't even know. So.
And I don't know if you can pull it up and share your screen at some point, Bill, but we do have a website, centerforindigenousministries.org. And it has information on the website about who we are, but particularly under the staff and the contact, there's a new area now that we're rolling out called kinship, that if you want to sign up to be a member at our organization, it's just either as an individual or as an organization. Certainly, you are welcome to contribute financially, but you are not required. But it's kind of at least gathering a list of supporters and allies in the ministry that we can then say to the general church, see, people know who we are and people are supporting us. So I encourage you to take a look at our website, again, centerforindigenousministries.org.
And I put that in the chat for people.
All right, thank you.
I'll share that when I make this recording shared wider as well. It seems to me, that part of this issue is that it's so easy, not easy, but the difference between this and other ministries is that part of the way you get seen is even when you register for events, you choose what group you're in, we try to keep track of that. But a lot of people would never put down that they are indigenous. It gets lost in that, and therefore those don't get counted. Therefore, the whole indigenous part of our church gets lost and underrepresented. So
yes, very much so.
Yeah.
And that's why, we're trying under that staff contacts, that kinship kind of network, because there is a box to check in indigenous or non-indigenous. And certainly if you're non-indigenous, you're still welcome to support the Center for Indigenous Ministry. But we are trying to look at doing much more kind of a survey to see where are our indigenous siblings and kin in congregations across Turtle Island, both in Canada and the United States.
And I could add also that as that is important, if we look at some of the other churches, we could look at the United Church, for example, that we've just joined with, and
Yeah.
they have done an incredible amount of work to make people aware of the Indigenous situation, and it's not really focused on members of the church being Indigenous. It's more focused on members of the non-Indigenous public being made aware of what has been going on and what's still going on today. So,
Yeah. And I will say, Crow, too, like the United Church of Canada, as well as the UCC here in the American denomination, I believe the Episcopal Church, surprisingly, the Catholic Church has a component of Indigenous ministry as well. And particularly the Methodists, they have hired an Indigenous Phillips alum, Siobhan Colonel, to do a lot of programming to educate the larger church on issues facing Indigenous peoples. And we don't have that.
Excellent. Again, on the screen today, at the most recent winter talk, we had several people from Virginia who were able to attend that, not in person, but a thank you for providing it virtually, because that so much allows more people to attend and connect in today's world. So really think about that. But others on here may want to introduce themselves or at least ask a question and just let people know if this is, again, just a conversation, and we'll share it with others later.
Yeah, I would love to see our other kin and hear from them with an introduction, just to, again, because it is all about relationships. So I would love to meet folks.
Well, I'll ask Dan to introduce himself.
Yeah, hi. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. This is all new to me. I'm relatively new to the denomination, I guess. I was UCC and here, and then by way of our bi-denominational status at our church here, I'm UCC and Disciples, and I'm grateful for it, for sure. I also am from Oklahoma originally.
Okay.
It is my home, and a member of the Choctaw Nation. And so grew up in Oklahoma, has its own very unique history, as you know, Lisa, and and its own set of trauma and identity crisis, for sure. And it's a state of just, it's very interesting. And I grew up in and out of, the Choctaw, some of the Chickasaw Nation and Comanche Nation too. So I've just, all over Oklahoma, as most of us move around for work and with our family. Anyway, it's its own story. But anyway, where was I going with this? Oh, but yeah, I'm here in Virginia. So I'm here in Bill's gracious enough to I'm online today with you all. I appreciate and just trying to understand more. I'm glad you were able to roll that out. Thank you, Mr. Eddy, also for your introduction and sharing. It sounds quite interesting. Now Oklahoma's full of Indian, we call them Indian churches. A lot of us grew up in and out of Indian churches. So, it's a lot of that, but I don't know the Disciples in Oklahoma. I didn't even, Phillips is new to us. My wife is attending online there and enjoying it, but I didn't even realize. I grew up Baptist, like a lot of us did. I went to Oklahoma Baptist University, and that's, I was fourth generation there. So that's, there you go, from Indian schools to the Oklahoma Baptist University, many folks. But anyway, that's a little bit about some of my story there.
Thank you, Dan. And Dan, you made a great point. In Oklahoma, I mean, I drive up to see my mom in Blackwell, and I pass through the Ponca land, and I see the Ponca Nazarene Church and the Ponca Baptist Church. The Indian Methodist well, the Methodists have their own Indian conference that encompasses a lot of small churches in Oklahoma for Methodists, but Disciples don't have that. And again, that has contributed to a lot of then the invisibility within the denomination and the ability to overlook Indigenous social justice issues. So thank you.
Interesting.
Excellent. Others, Marilyn, do you want to introduce yourself? And I know you were at Winter Talk. You actually attended live 2 years ago, I believe. Yeah.
Good afternoon to everyone. I am Marilyn Whitaker. I am now chairing the Anti-Racist and Pro-Reconciliation Ministry here in Virginia. And yes, I did attend the Winter Talks. Been more than 2 years, Bill. We've been in pandemic 3, so I think it was right before, probably been 4 years. I did attend, and I am wearing my shirt that I got when I was at the Winter Talk.
Yay! We'll have some more at General
Today.
Assembly. We printed them again.
Well, I purchased that at the Winter Talk, and I am proudly to wear this today. And it's also wonderful to see you, Dr. Lisa, and to Dr. Crow again, because I was there in your presence at the Winter Talk, and it's truly, truly a blessing to be in your presence on today. It's not new to me or what you all are sharing, but it is heartbreaking to hear that progress is still not at where it needs to be today. So we're going to continue to strive and praying that God will bless you all and to work with you all in any way that we can. And that's why I'm on today. I was able to be a part of this today, and I'm thankful. And to hearing what you are sharing to us, and that we have I share this with everybody. We have the best regional minister on this side of heaven. So I know that with his help and with all of us backing him, we know, and the help of the Lord, we know that something will be done soon and very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yay. Thank you, Marilyn.
Thank you, Marilyn.
Honored. Pastor Easley, you know you're on the road. You may not have the ability, but if you want to, just opening that up. Otherwise, you can just give me thumbs up. It's up to you. So you're on mute right now. There
Can you hear me?
We can now. Yep, go ahead.
Okay. Pastor Miranda Easley of Shaw Christian Church, Eden, North Carolina. I am a chairperson for a new church ministry in Virginia, and my mind is going 100 miles an hour after hearing you sharing what you have shared today. And my mind is, okay, where is the people and how can we get them involved with the ministries that is needed? That, like you say, has, I didn't realize, that there was a lack of that ministry in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. And so thank you so much for sharing this information, with us today, for us to come together as a people of God to correct and do all that we possibly can to make things happen, to change the situation of the Indigenous people.
Thank you, Pastor Easley.
Excellent. And Marquita and Jennifer, I can't see you, and if you can't talk, that's okay, but I did want to give you the opportunity if you wanted to say anything and introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I was hoping Jennifer would go first, but but it is truly an honor and a pleasure to be in your presence. I've been the recipient of in the crowd to hear Dr. Barnett several times. She gives a wonderful, wonderful presentation. I've attended Winter Talks with Mr. Eddy, who just lightens my heart whenever I see him. Yeah. I have had the pleasure of being in a workshop with Pastor Harrison and everyone there. My question is, and I'm like Pastor Easley, where are the people and how can we get them involved? I too am a member of the ARPR ministry under Miss Whitaker, and I think if you asked me several years ago that regarding the DOC church, is it possible to be reconciled? I would have said no. What has changed my mind is the fact going out and being a part of the ministry and having the workshops. You would be surprised to people who feel that there's no such thing as racism. So I'm thinking that they also feel that there's no problem with the indigenous people. Relationships and starting the conversation are the key components that have changed my mind in thinking that the people of God today want to reconcile, want us all to be together. And so I'm thinking, how is it that we can develop relationships regarding the indigenous people with primarily members of Christ in the state of Virginia?
Yeah, great question. First of all, I mean, understanding that there are indigenous people in your congregation. Some look more like me with the skin coloring, but there is an indigenous descent. Sadly, in the United States, at some point, a lot of folks lost a cultural connection to the indigeneity because in Oklahoma terms, Dan, it wasn't cool to be Indian at different periods of time, right? And so the loss of culture contributed a lot to the loss of identity and the proudness around some of that identity. But there are indigenous folks in every state and in a lot of disciple congregations. They're just not highlighted in terms of a unified ministry like other groupings within the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, because Center for Indigenous Ministries, we're not even a recognized ministry. We're housed as Yakima Christian Mission under DHM right now. We changed the title to be much more open and progressive with the kind of work that we wanted to do, but we're still recognized. Even our resolution has to come from Dave Bell, who oversees the Yakima Christian Mission, because we couldn't present the resolution. We're not a recognized ministry. And that's part of what the resolution is asking, that at some point, could we be a recognized ministry? And work then, Marquita, with that idea of building relationships and educating people about issues of oppression that also affect indigenous folks. Crow, I'll let you add to that.
Yeah, I'm just, my mind is on the fact that there are indigenous people out there and how invisible they really are. In my father's period, I call it the period of great denial. So a lot of natives, and Mi'kmaq don't look a Hollywood movie kind of native to start with. So it was easier to deny your heritage, to get a job, to ensure your children weren't scooped by residential schools, marry outside of your native culture. So here in Mi'kmaq or Nova Scotia, a lot of people kind of drifted away from their indigeneity. And so back to the point of what our ministry provides, what happened here was, I guess it would have been in the 70s, there was no band council in the South Shore and Western Shore of Nova Scotia. All the reservations were around Halifax or north of there, and yet there was this huge population of natives that were working with other people, non-natives, and living with non-natives and in the community. I know of some people from my own disciples church here, and so somebody decided to form a band council and put out a call for these people. And people there was a lot of shock in the community because people couldn't believe, oh, you're Native? I never knew you were Native, because people just, the racism made people quiet. They wouldn't offer up the fact that they were Native. But now there was this opportunity to join Acadia First Nations. People were coming out of the woodwork. People were getting status cards. People were returning to their traditions and to their ancestors and understanding where they came from. And then shortly after that, the Native Council of Nova Scotia was formed to protect and look after those people that might not be able to get a status card, might not qualify through the government's ridiculous regulations of proving history, when history, especially in this province, was never really recorded. So there's no proof. And more people came out of the woodwork to identify and join their roots and enjoy their roots. And so I see it as the more our church embraces our ministry, offers people that opportunity. If there's people in the congregations that have just gotten by being who they are, they might want to wake up to either say, I am Native, or my great grandmother was Native. It's still part of them and part of who they are. And interesting enough, and what I've experienced in my life, it's part of how we think. We think differently. We see the world differently, not better, not worse, just differently. And I think that connects us.
This is all great, and that's the reason why I wanted to have this conversation on DOCTALKS. And while we'll put it out there, it's partly I just want to bring awareness, because I believe that there are people who may not even know or are in denial of their Indigenous background and heritage, but there are also people out there who want to support this ministry. And I love the tab, the kinship tab that's on the website, and we'll definitely connect that. But I wonder if people are hearing this, what are other ways that they might, in their own congregations or in their own ministries, what are some things they might just start to do to help or be part the journey, to be on the journey?
Mm-hmm. I think, first of all, just figuring out whose land your church is on, the history of the congregation, the history of the people that were once there. And as messy as land acknowledgements are, again, like Crow said, it's a start to at least on an anniversary or on a key time of gathering, to acknowledge that this land is not our own, and that we have to be mindful of those ancestors who traversed before this church became into being. And then I would say, within those local communities, finding out the Indigenous groupings that are in the area, and are there peoples still living in the area to connect with and start to build those relationships, and to start to then listen on how the church can provide a ministry to Indigenous peoples in that area, without being the patronizing, we will come and save you and help you, but what can we do to partner with you to make the community better? Crow?
Yeah, little starts, little steps, changing ourselves. Is a start to change everything. I think we're all aware of that. Yeah, there was something on the tip of my mind here. It'll come back. Land acknowledgements, right? What we've started to do at our congregation. They've allowed me now to conduct my healing circles through the church. So there is a space available for different activities if there's are Native people in your community. And also, I believe in the United States, you have a Aboriginal Day. Don't you have is there an Aboriginal Day in the
Yes.
United States?
Indigenous Peoples Day, yes.
Yeah, and we have an Aboriginal month in Canada, and
Mm.
what our church does for that month is we set up a side table. People bring in artifacts and personal items, and they're all displayed on that table: drums, arrowheads, this kind of leather things, this kind of stuff. The Mi'kmaq flag, we're one of the few nations that has its own flag. And so all these things are displayed, and then there's a little bit worked into the service for each service for the month. So it's celebrated at our church, and it starts with Aboriginal Day and then continues for the rest of the month, and so that's just a little start. But like I said, the little starts are really where it starts, isn't it? And what would we always say? Baby steps, right? And from there, contacting elders, if there are elders in your area, those are I think really important people to make connections with, because they are they are spiritual people also, looking to connect in a bigger way. I mean, if we're looking at a reservation, it's like looking at a city. There's all levels of people, and morality and everything else is going to take place, and yet elders are the people who are trying to keep it all together, rather than the band councils who don't have the greatest reputations. So that's one thing. Yes, Marilyn?
I liked it when you said taking baby steps, Brother Eddie, is that one thing in the anti-racism pro-reconciliation ministry, we are starting a conversation. This is fairly new to the region. We have not been having conversations or being at the table talking. As a Black woman, there have been times that we could not go to the table as well. So, but now we are at the table and we are having conversations. I don't know how Bill feels about it, but maybe that's something where the region can start, is having conversation about the indigenous community. Like you say, a lot of people don't know. Of course, my grandmother was Cherokee, so I am a part of that community as well, part of the family. So, and I would love, and of course, my daughter has done some research on our family because we want to know. I feel that we're on property that belongs to the indigenous community, but it's very educated to know, it's good to get educated on this, but we have to start somewhere. And I feel that just like we doing around the region, we're having small table talk conversations on anti-racism. That could be a start as well for the indigenous community.
I think that's wonderful, Marilyn, and I just like to point out that as we start our talks, as we look at this, there's definitely two sides, and there's definitely a very strong spiritual side. So there's a political side and a spiritual side. When we get to the political side, we start to scare people. Are they going to take our lands? Are they going to take our homes that already belongs to them? What happens? We get into all those kinds of conversations, but there's also a very strong spiritual side that, do our brothers and sisters need to connect with us? Do we need to be all connected? Do we need to help one another, love one another?
And there's great opportunities, and I like that, Crow, those spiritual connections. There are great opportunities for interfaith work to be done in particular regions of the country. For instance, we in the Utah, Nevada area, but particularly Utah, doing a lot more kind of work, maybe partnering with the Mormon Church, even the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, to help the Navajo people, because there are still places on some native land in the United States where there is not running water, right? There are still places of abject poverty in the Dakotas and particularly out west, where we could be partnering with some other denominations to help try to bring, at least petition legislators to help do more, right? To help bring some of those basic services to different parts of our country.
And we can also support situations that, as a group, we can support situations that arise. There was a nation in northern Quebec that had no support. Hydro-Quebec came in and built a dam which destroyed most of their food from the river. We're talking a very remote nation here that was still living on the land and the fish out of the river. Well, the river was destroyed, and ironically, these people don't have hydro. As hydro's pumped past them, the poverty is incredible. So there are situations like that, and hopefully, Lisa, on our website, maybe we could look at a page or look at a way to find some of these situations and announce them to people if they wish to get involved in supporting, putting out their support, writing letters, whatever it takes for situations for communities that don't have a voice at all. They're so remote.
Right. Yeah. And we probably do need to expand our website to do a better job of bringing those attentions. I know Dave does a lot, particularly, I think he's got a trip coming with Bear Flat out in Utah. And again, some of the water issues related to Native peoples out there. But yeah, we could do better as ourselves as a council to publicize some of those areas around North America for churches to think about maybe getting involved.
Absolutely. And one thing that we do here is we also encourage people like to have a book list, books that help people learn more. Yes. I actually grew up in Iowa, and the invisibility piece, I had no idea growing up that of any Indigenous, and yet my towns were all named. It was clear if I would just open my eyes and my ears, I would realize there had been people before me. There's just so many towns that the state of Iowa is not, and so part of is anything we can do. I think the readings are good to help those to learn more of the stories. I think they were good. And the other piece you always hear me say, and this region's probably getting tired of me saying the word, but propinquity, which is, I think, just spending time close to each other, going to a place just to listen and learn another person's story. That's why I like DOCTALKS as well. We just learn another person's story, and I'm so thankful for this time. We're coming to the top of the hour at this point in time. I just any last words, any last questions that people have around this topic or more, or just simple acknowledgement. I want to say thank you for this conversation, and I hope that it even beyond this in the recording will allow people to connect and get involved, and maybe even realize that they have their own heritage if they take a look at that as well. So, last
and
words.
I will say we're still looking for congregations who would want to sign on and help sponsor our resolution. that we have submitted. And you can contact Dave Bell via the website for Center for Indigenous Ministries. I don't know if he's posted a sample of our resolution. If not, I'm going to shoot him an email when we're done telling him to put that up there. And if congregations would be interested, or individual pastors or ministries or whatever, you can help sign on. We're starting to get more congregations doing that, but the more the merrier.
And I'd like to say thank you very much for having me here, and also something that Bill said about reading and learning more, and you could even start reading circles within your congregations. But Dave Bell does have a reading group, online reading group that is active. I'm not sure if it's on the website, but Dave's contact information is on the website, so you could get a hold of Dave about that if you wanted to participate.
Well, excellent, everybody. Thank you very much for the conversation, and hope this has been really informative, but also just as I love to have these conversations, that it enriches and makes brings awareness. But just listening to another person's story, my heart is enriched today. And I just thank you for your willingness to share and have this conversation on DOCTALKS. Thank you all.
Thank you,
Thank
Bill.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Bye
you
now.
all. Bye.
Bye.